So the first thing I want to talk about is how you evaluate an industry. We're going to start very broad, and then we're also, by the very end, we're going to start doing some basic accounting. So the first one I want to touch on whenever you're evaluating a company is what are the industry's growth prospects. So the one that I use is computer chips versus railroads. So which one do you assume would grow faster? Which one would give you a greater return and profit? Not a specific company, but just the industry as a whole. Computer chips versus railroad companies. Which one do y'all think? Computer chips, right?
Yeah,
I know that's.
I know what you're saying.
You can argue that.
I think that the problem is, what if quantum computing starts to become more mainstream and these chips kind of become more obsolete?
Right.
We are for how wealthy of a nation we're in, we are very underdeveloped in railroad infrastructure. You could argue that if someone wants to invest in that there's a lot more growth to be had in railroads versus computer chips.
You could argue that, but I'm talking the very short term on the industry prospects. We talk about the FANG stocks who drove the S&P to all-time highs. All technology companies. You're talking about, you can pull up a technology ETF versus a railroad ETF, and the growth is unparalleled. Now there could be something that happens, and that will get into the economic implications. You started seeing that, but there's no doubt that a computer chip company, just your generic computer chip company versus your generic railroad company, you would expect higher growth out of a computer chip company, just because technology is driving our lives every single day. So that's the point I was trying to make. Sure, you can argue every single point, but we're going to get into specific companies a little bit more. Also, what are the barriers to entry for the respective industry? So for instance, whenever you're looking at something like airlines, their costs are so large to get started, you have basically a natural oligopoly. You're only going to have a select few just because the barriers to entry are so large, versus a restaurant like Chipotle. I love Chipotle, right? But me and you could go start a restaurant tomorrow. Given that it wouldn't be as successful as Chipotle or traded publicly, the point is that the food industry versus the airlines industry, the barriers to entry are completely different. And those are really important to evaluate for future competition. Also, is the company an industry leader? We'll talk about this because we're going to do a lot of relative evaluations of companies and compare them to each other. To find in a specific industry who the best company to invest in is. The next one is, does the company's business model make sense? Once a famous investor said, if you don't understand it, don't buy it, don't invest in it. So, this whole premise is true. If a company's business model doesn't make sense to you or you see a flaw with it, there could be a problem long term with the company's growth.
Yeah, Warren Buffett, he and Bill Gates are friends, but he doesn't have Microsoft stock because he doesn't understand how it works. Right. So, you can have people around, you can understand maybe how a company works or something like that, but the basic idea is, does the company's business model make sense? If you don't really understand it, that maybe I personally wouldn't invest in anything I don't understand, but you can make money if everything else kind of lines up. It's just some food for thought. If you understand it and you see a niche and you constantly think that business model will be profitable in the long run. That's the point I'm trying to make. So I'm going to be kind of pitching some fundamental analysis that I've currently done, just to show y'all how you can apply these things. One space that I really found that I really like, that nobody's really looking at, and that I've made a lot of money in last year, and I continue to make some decent money in, is the discount retail space. So these are your Burlington, your Ross, your TJ Maxx. The reason why is I understand their business model, I understand exactly what they do, and I think that is just genius, especially with what's going on right now in the retail space. They've found a niche, and their profits are through the roof, honestly. So what do y'all think about these subcategories? What do you think of the space, the industry of its own? Ask these questions. What do y'all think of its growth prospects versus regular retail? Do you see a greater growth in there?
I actually tried to build a model with JC. I think out of those three, I only included Ross, and maybe Burlington, but I use like JCPenney, Macy's. My goal was to see how much they change during the holidays, because that's usually the best time to buy these types of stocks. I remember Macy's shot up like 6% in one day on like December 21st of last year, but then there was really weird, like JCPenney dropped like 5%, but they had ramped up a lot in the beginning of that entire quarter. So it's like, are some of the models of these businesses to ramp up through that quarter before the holidays, or do they like prefer that big spike right before? That's, yeah.
So I mean, the models that they use are completely different for each one. For instance, I was reading through Burlington's 10K, and they specified in their 10K that they actually saw the greatest growth whenever seasonality changes would hit sooner than people expected. So for instance, if spring or fall was a little bit colder than you expected, you might be looking to go buy a coat, right? So for instance, they might have that. So it's really interesting. I do understand the seasonality change that you're talking about, and that's going to apply probably across all retail. And it's going to change. This is kind of a subcategory of actual retail. So I don't think, honestly, you could compare Burlington versus JCPenney. They're two completely different business models.
Who's Burlington suppliers?
I will get to that. I'll answer that question in just a second. So give me a second, and I'll answer that question for you. But also their business model. So any questions about kind of how to apply these?
You mentioned Chipotle, right? So I just want to know how this restaurant businesses, how their growth and stocks, those graphs look like. I mean, why would they dip? In what situations would they dip? Is it not mostly consistent? Like, Chipotle, just think about Chipotle. Why would a Chipotle stock go down?
I mean, there's so many drivers, it's hard for me to answer that one specific question. For one instance, I know that they had an E. coli breakout, and their stock tanked 10-15% because of that E. coli breakout. You can also look at consumer spending cycles and try to say that, whenever you're on a tighter budget, you're not going to eat out as much. There's so many factors that play into a stock price that it's really hard for me to answer that question.
And they charge for what?
Yeah. Yeah, they charge for quality.